Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Daisy Ridley, who is an actor, producer, and also created the original idea for the movie Magpie. And one of the things that I wanted to start off by talking about is in terms of conceptualizing that initial idea, it sounds like it went on a little bit of a journey from the original germination that you had, which was working with a young actress who was about 6 years old, and the idea of if you're on set all day for these long hours, what is that difference between reality and pretend? And then as you and Tom Bateman, who then wrote the script and produced this film with you, started to think more in depth, the perspective of where this story is being told from really shifted. And I was really curious about the conversations that led to that.
So yeah, the original idea was really for an actor who at the time I was filming in Canada and it was lockdown. So it was really, so I mean, being on set anyway is amazing and you're surrounded by people and it's so exciting and it's so intoxicating. And then I would get back and be feel quite isolated because of course we were at that time. And I think the extremes of being so busy on set and then being isolated, I got to thinking if I didn't have, when the job was over, I go home and I have a stable life and all that sort of stuff. And I got to thinking about if one didn't have that and how destabilizing that might be, particularly when you're spending intense amounts of time with people and those intimate bonds that are formed between everyone on a set, but also the relationship, say, between someone playing a mother and someone playing a child. Um, and Joey, who played my daughter in the film that I was doing at that time, she knew I wasn't her mum, but I was like, she's 6 years old. This is so kooky. Um, and originally the idea was actually an actress infiltrating a family and for like I love Joey so much, but an actress falling in love with a child and really trying to work their way in. So I landed and told Tom and he started working on that, but a little way into writing, he just said, I feel much more drawn to the woman at home, the woman who doesn't get to experience the excitement of set, the woman who in many ways is feeling like the other woman as a mum. Um, and of course, then there's many, many layers with Annette, who I play, of a husband who has a wandering eye. And so she's also contending with that. But really, we got to thinking about if someone's life is really about their children and their child goes off and has someone else playing their mum, that is such a sort of moral conversation. So that's where we went.
I also love the way that I've heard you describe that you really wanted to make something that felt very artistic and very high concept, but also ultimately was very character driven.
Mm.
Because there's also these genre elements that are mixed into the film, and I think there's such a delicacy to finding the voice of what that looks like. And so, how did you navigate finding that with Tom and with the rest of the team working on this film?
We knew we were going to have, I had read Tom's scripts and I know how beautifully drawn his characters are. So I knew that would be there anyway. And Tom and I have a similar taste in film and we watch all sorts of things. And we had actually seen Daniel Kaluuya talk about making films that he wants to see. And it always really struck me because, of course, that's what everybody's doing. But I don't think I'd ever really heard it articulated in that way of course, we should make films that we want to see and that we want our friends to watch. So as we were making it, it was a real joy because we just kept coming back to this thing of, oh, we love this and felt very on the path of what we love in the hope that other people would then love it in terms of that genre tonal feel. And then Tom's writing, I think, is just amazing. The relationships are very believable. You're meeting this couple in a moment that isn't good, and it hasn't been good for a while. And it's not terrible. It's just daily difficulties. And particularly for Annette, whose identity has been squashed and who has made a lot of compromises with her husband in order to facilitate his creative freedom. It's an interesting place to come in and meet two people, because you, and particularly casting Shaz, we needed someone who you can see why Annette married him, and you can see why they've been together as long as they have, even as we learn with his various indiscretions. But also he has, you know, there's a turn, and then you see Ben in quite a different light. So casting was really key for the richness of the characters, and I think so much of that was Tom's script. And of course we have this wonderful second half into this great ending, but you have to care about the characters you're watching to pull that off. And I think so much of that is in the writing, so much that is in the casting, and so much of it is in how Sam Yates, our director, and Laura Bellingham, our DP, captured it. This very real claustrophobia with my character in this beautiful house. It's a beautiful house, it's a nice life, but she just can't get away. It's suffocating. So all of these layers of how it was shot, and really, I think, add to that the character study.
I also like that you were mentioning there the idea that she's made certain concessions, you know, which you do in any sort of partnership or marriage, which is he was the one that wanted to move to the countryside, so she's no longer near the people that she was close to, and kind of is very isolated from that. But it kind of asks the question of, what do you do when that's no longer enough? It's, you know, I did these things for you and I really want to make this work. And so how did you set about trying to explore how that felt for Annette of, I do really want to be in this, but it's just not working?
Concessions is a word I've been trying to think of all week. That is the word, concessions. I think what Tom and I have talked about generally is people that move goalposts. So two people get together, and initially one of them says to the other, I love that you're so talkative. When we go out, you could talk to anyone. It's amazing. And then 6 months later, oh, you talk so much. And those moving goalposts that can happen in a relationship of things that someone once loved about their partner becomes a burden or becomes a difficulty. And having witnessed that in other people's relationships, it's really difficult to be around, because it's like, you know, when you're at dinner with people and someone says something, you think, oh my God, it's super awkward. But you can't get involved because it's not your relationship. And it's not that people are often trying to be mean. It's just a sort of casual indifference to one's partner. And a lot of the time, you know, we're all dealing with small injustices every day, whether you're like barged on the tube or whatever, just small little things that people don't mean, but it's, you know, it builds. And in Annette's relationship, it's just a series of paper cuts. It's not big blows all the time, but just paper cuts and just little things that after a certain amount of time cause a lot of damage. But I feel playing her, I was so driven by Hiba, who plays my daughter in it, Matilda. Oh, she's so amazing. And I think for Annette as a character, when all of this difficulty means that she's incredibly isolated, the one real good thing in her life is her children. So that for me, playing her was always the driving force. And it's interesting because there are moments of release that I have playing her, but she never fully releases because she has to keep it together for her kids. And it was a big distinction we wanted to make, that she's not struggling because her baby cries, and, you know, she's struggling because she's isolated and she doesn't have a support system to deal with a baby who doesn't sleep much. And just wanting to make sure that was, we were honoring her as a mother. And because I don't have children, that was something we took very seriously with Kate, who we produced it with. But yeah, so much is driven by that isolation, but she loves these kids so much. And so that tiny shred of strength that she maintains even at her lowest point before the strength starts building again in the second half of the film, that for me was always driven by the love of her children.
Right, because even with the tension and all the kind of internalizing that we see her doing, there's this light that comes out whenever she's, you know, particularly with her daughter Matilda, you know, who's able to talk and run around and engage in a slightly different way than a baby can at that point. And so when you were playing her, how did you want to have these different aspects of who she is in the day to day and how she's feeling, and then just the way that she is able to find a little bit more of herself when she's in those moments with her kids?
Well, I think I mean, it is a very clear distinction between, particularly in the beginning of the movie, between Annette alone and Annette with her daughter. And the thing was, we got so much of that relationship for free because Hiba is so wonderful. So working with her, we had got together as much as possible before the shoot to try and get that bond. And she's just so smart, so emotionally intelligent. And she didn't fully know what was going on in the story. Of course, she only knew what scenes were going on, but she was so perceptive. She really knew what was going on. And me and her just got on really well and played lots of games and hung out to try and really establish that contact. And it was interesting because as we were filming, we did the first bit of the shoot in the house, which so much of my action takes place in. I had a lot of time alone. I was doing a lot of those scenes alone when Annette is separate. So when Hiba was there, naturally I felt a lot more elated anyway, because I got to be in there with her. But yeah, so much of it was so easy with her because she is such a little gem. But for Annette, really, those are the high points in her day. And, you know, there are a lot of conversations about loneliness or just moments that speak to loneliness. And particularly in the beginning of the film, Annette is really lonely. And when her child goes to work, it is actually difficult for her. And of course, she doesn't want that pressure to be on her child for her to be the thing that's keeping her together. But the reality is, at this moment in Annette's life, Matilda is the best thing about everything.
I also love before when you were talking that you were really distinguishing this isn't something where she's feeling disconnected from her baby, from her younger child, but it's really just the lack of support system and the loneliness and the isolation. But in turn, there's still kind of two things at play. There's that loneliness and isolation and not having a support system. And then there's also the isolation that she feels from the internal implosion that's happening in her marriage. And for you, were those kind of two different distinctive sides of it, or did it all just kind of really meld into one for you?
I think so much of it was driven by tiredness. I mean, I'm in New York working, and the first night we were here, someone was doing vocal warm-ups in the room next door, literally at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I had to be up at 6 yesterday. And you know, adrenaline surges you and you go through the day, but sleep really does something to you. And not having a baby, I don't understand that feeling, but having friends who describe the feeling of night after night after night of not being able to sleep and what that does to you and how sort of things warp. I mean, you know, even to the point I was listening to something with a sleep scientist, and he was saying you literally cannot process emotion the same way, which obviously makes sense when you don't have enough sleep. So actually a lot of it was driven by that, and then the noise. And I mean, the sound on this is so great, but that noise of crying is just difficult. So all of it together, I think I didn't feel I didn't feel like it was distinguishable in terms of performance of what it just felt playing her like it was just one thing after another. And I think we all have the capacity to cope with quite a lot of things, but when it's just too much, it's difficult. And then, you know, if you've had a bad day and then you can have someone to talk to, be that a partner, be that a friend, and you can sort of, you know, let loose and let it go, it can help. But she just does not have that release. And particularly in the beginning of the film, she uses breath to try and calm, but actually all that's doing is holding on to more because she won't let herself release. Because it also felt like she is a character that if she released too much, who knows where that would end, you know? So even the breathing, which she tries to do to calm, was a sort of sustaining whole held thing, which is also not healthy. And actually, Sam, our director, when he pitched for the film, he said something really interesting that we hadn't actually noticed in the script, which was that you never see Annette put like eat or drink, put anything in her mouth. And Ben is constantly eating and constantly drinking. And even that, the sort of appetite for life, the appetite for food and for drink and for life that Ben has. And Annette is so busy, sort of, she barely has time to nourish herself, you know?
That's such a great point that he noticed that detail. You know, and even with that description of the breath as well, did you find quite a physical tension it naturally in playing her because of that?
Yeah. Yeah, I felt it was one of those things that because we had such a fantastic shoot and then I had so much to think about because I also produced the movie, it wasn't that I wasn't aware of how stressful it was playing her, but afterwards I was like my shoulders are up here and it took a little while to come down. Yeah, to play someone that's so held. And even that the wonderful second half of the film, which I really it was such a delicious performance for me to enjoy. Because Annette is really enjoying what's going on at that point. But even still, she never gets that full release. So I think having held on to that for as long as I did with the sustaining that sort of energetic with withholding, yeah, it took a little while to for that to dispel after we finished the shoot.
It also sounds like you thought very specifically throughout the process about how to really create that sense of tension on
Mm.
screen. You know, from like film references being really varied from things like Tully all the way down to like Eyes Wide Shut,
Yeah.
but also just in terms of the idea of how the camera could be used in a very specific way
Yeah.
with, you know, close-ups and very specific zooms. And so once Sam came on as a director, what were the conversations that you and Tom really had specifically about that? Because I think it's so crucial to the way that this story is told on screen.
Well, Tom and I's references specifically as we had started were Tully, Homecoming, the TV show with Julia Roberts. You know, when you start you're saying something and you're like, that is the title, right? I think that's the title. And Gone Girl. So those were the three of our references. And it was actually Sam and Laura, our DP, who were very drawn to Hitchcock and particularly to John Demme. And with Silence of the Lambs, that perspective of the way that Jodie Foster's character is looking at the world is as we are used to seeing filming. So, like, you know, eye lines and everything being what feels natural on screen. And whenever Annette's looked at, the eye line gets incredibly close, and you're like, whoa, why am I? It feels so intrusive and voyeuristic. So that all came from Sam and Laura. And shots like I remember the moment where the baby monitor's going. So Annette has actually tried to have some coffee and it's cold. And then the baby monitor starts going and the crying and she just needs to escape. And I remember Sam saying there's this amazing tracking shot and Sam saying Annette is trying to escape the camera, like the camera's trying to keep up with her and she's trying to escape. And then even that moment, the sound goes and in the field and she still is pulled back to this house. So really that is all down to Laura and Sam. And it's sort of amazing in a way because I had a lot to think about. But of course, when I was on set playing Annette, I want to be on set playing Annette. And I was able to do that because we got the most unbelievable crew, the most unbelievable cast, and trusting everyone to the way I describe it is laying the table. Is like as an actor, you come to set, and when everything is so wonderful as it was, particularly on this film, you're sitting down at a banquet. There's so much has already been laid, so much has already been set, so much of that feeling is already there because of our production designer, Amanda. There's just so many layers that have already been built to then put a performance into.
And it sounds like you also thought very specifically about where is Annette at every single point in the story, because I heard that you, Tom, and Kate Solomon, who's also a producer on the film, sat down and, you know, like you were saying earlier, a lot of Annette's scenes take place in the house, but that doesn't mean that she's there for the 12 hours a day that her
Yeah.
husband's on set with their daughter.
Yeah.
And so what was that process of going through all of the scenes and thinking, okay, if this is happening over here, then where is she and what's she doing in this moment?
Yeah, we did a lot of work about where everyone was at the times that they are. So even if we're, as you say, if we're with Ben on set, what is Annette doing at that time? Even if we don't see her, we knew where she was at any given moment. So we plotted that out really carefully. we had our sticky notes. So what was happening on screen, what was happening off screen, but what we knew about, and then what ultimately the audience would know and what the audience wouldn't know. Because so much of the film is about what is it that we're seeing? Is this a reliable perspective? Is this actually what's happening? Is there truths? Are there truths that are being concealed, or are there lies that are being concealed? So making sure that all of those things matched up, so that looking back, the timelines of everyone, we always knew where everybody was something that, yeah, me, Tom, and Kate did.
One of the other things that struck me in watching her is that you have certain scenes and moments with her that really explore that idea of her struggling to figure out what her sense of identity is at this stage as well. You know, there's the lunch that she has with an old colleague, and she's really only able to talk about her kids. She kind of struggles to talk about herself in that moment.
Yeah.
You know, because she isn't able to have those conversations in her day to day, and everything has been focused in that direction. And so for you, what was that experience that she was going through of, I really knew who I was and I had this solid sense of self, and it just feels like the rug's been pulled from underneath all of that?
God, these questions are fantastic. Well, funnily enough, that scene that you're referring to was probably my most difficult performance day. Because as you say, this is Annette in a moment trying to present something that she used to be, but she hasn't been that for a while. And we all know time passes more and more quickly as life goes on. And it feels to her that not long ago she was in this office environment and she's referring to people that she had a clear idea of who they were and their place in the working landscape. And she's learning that time has moved on and everyone's moved on. And she's so destabilized, particularly from the morning. And again, it's not the baby's fault. It's that her husband did not sort out a babysitter and did not remember that she had an important meeting. So she is left literally holding the baby. And I remember that day because it's so richly drawn, and I knew exactly what the scene should be. But I was like, this is really, really hard. And I felt like I couldn't get a real grip on performing it. And Alistair, who plays Richard, is so wonderful. But I'm a producer, so we need to make the day too. And I remember saying, God, I can't be the reason we don't make the day. This is insane. And we had so much else to do. But Sam was so wonderful and calm. And I did take him aside and was like, this is tough. And it's funny, it's sometimes the scenes that you're really not expecting to be the most difficult that are the most difficult. But that I took him aside and was like, I don't know why this is so difficult. And of course, in many ways, it is of course it's difficult. It's her in an environment that she's not used to, presenting herself in a way that she's not used to, trying to have conversations that she's not used to. So everything is destabilizing. But that day was actually really difficult because I also wanted to make sure we understand who Annette was in her work. And she did have an identity that wasn't just about her family. She had an identity that was just about her. But it's just each time she tries to say something else, it's just like a house of cards and one thing's fallen, and that embarrassment of, and it was such a brilliant detail Tom put in, but just having lost the earring somewhere along the way and feeling she's already, embarrassed in many ways, but then the physical embarrassment of I couldn't even make sure I had both my earrings in. And it's such a small thing, but that is the straw. And then from then on, it's slightly downhill.
Right. And even just that idea that you touched upon there of she doesn't really have the words to say and she doesn't really know what to say. I feel like that's so commonplace in different scenes for really different reasons and in different ways for her. You know,
Mm.
she's not shouting and screaming at her husband. She's
Yeah.
not really able to express how she feels in a lot of ways. And so it creates this very internalized performance in a lot of scenes where the camera is just sitting there close up on you and we're just connecting with your character in the moment. And so, how did you set about finding the different intentions and the different reasons that she's not talking? Because sometimes it's this sadness, this depression, this isolation, and sometimes it's real anger and real fury.
Um, I think particularly a scene that comes to mind in terms of her really trying and then thinking this is too difficult is the scene on the sofa with her and Ben. So it's been the first day on set, and she really just wants to know how the day was. And she had made this amazing dinner and she didn't know that they wouldn't be able to eat together. And but she feels good. She's seen her daughter after a really difficult day. She's put her to bed. Everything seems okay. And that I felt was so much driven by her being terrified of saying the wrong thing. And again, I never thought of Ben as he's not physically a violent person, but there is emotional violence in their marriage. Um, and that feeling of whatever I say, I'm going to get it wrong. So trying really hard to say the right thing and engage in a way that she feels that Ben will engage on, even mentioning Alicia, because of course, by this point, Annette knows what her husband's like and would assume that he might be drawn to the movie star. But even mentioning her is a way to try and connect in a way. And I remember that moment, me and Sam talking about a duck paddling really, really hard, but things seeming okay out of the water. And that feeling of really trying and missing. And then Ben is sort of trying and missing, and they just can't meet. Their paths are not meeting even in this small conversation. So ultimately it's easier to not it's just easier to not have that conversation. So yeah, the scene with Richard is not having the words and not quite knowing how to be in that environment. And then the scene with Ben is, and so much of Annette's life in the beginning of this is dictated by the people around her. It's so responsive until she becomes more of an active character in her own life, I suppose. But she is being it felt like she was being dictated to by everyone else's moods, and she's just trying to fit in whatever way she can. So Ben is, can take up a lot of space in the room, and she's just trying to fill in whatever remaining there is. And the fact is, even though the relationship's difficult at that point, she still wants to try and make it work. They have children. She wants the stability for them. She wants also, honestly, the reality that she hasn't worked, so there's not a way out for her in that way. She needs to get back into work in order to leave. And then there are just so many things going on. But certainly with Ben, it just becomes a lot easier to not say it. And even when she tries to express herself, when she says later on, it's been really lonely this week, which is really true. It's difficult for her to be with the baby alone in the house, and he just ignores her. And again, it's that sort of casual cruelty that I don't think he's intentionally hurting her, but he just has fully stopped paying attention to her, and all of the things he probably loved about her, he just can't see anymore.
There's also a real intent in a lot of the scenes with Alicia, who's the movie actress on set, because Ben's the one going to set every day with their daughter and seeing her, and there is a day where she goes to set instead with the daughter, but the three of them are never in a scene until a little bit later in the movie. And I loved the choice that Annette doesn't try to confront what she suspects might be going on or have a conversation with the two of them or her husband. She really just sits back and allows him to walk into his own traps and to
Mm.
reveal himself. And so I just wanted to ask about the ruminations of that scene and that specific choice for her because I loved it.
In many ways, I actually felt it was interesting doing a scene with Matilda, who plays Alicia for the first time, because I felt so sorry for her. And of course, we all, it happens publicly. I'm sure it happens in people's private lives that the other woman is blamed for things. And the scene where me and her meet for the first time, I remember thinking, this poor woman, oh my God. And her character, Alicia's character, has been through so much and she's very fragile. And Ben to her has been an amazing protection in many ways, in a way that she really needed. Um, So it was interesting, that evolution of the two women meeting, and then yeah, the three of us meeting at that time. Tom describes it as, he said the scene with the three of us was the longest he took to write, because it's, we have so many puzzle pieces by that point, and the tension just needs to stay at such an uncomfortable level and maintain even through sitting there with Tilly, the little girl. And then when Tilly goes to bed and the three of them are alone, and the only, when the doorbell goes, the only, there's only one person it could be, and how to maintain that simmering tension, and how deeply uncomfortable it is before the lid comes off, as it were, and then everything is wrapped up very, very quickly. But I felt it was so enjoyable at that time, playing someone who knows precisely what's going on, and is uh letting things fall where they may, and honestly letting Ben uh dig his own proverbial grave in that moment.
I really loved this film and everything that you've created in it and your performance. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Daisy.
Thank you so much. Well, great questions. Thank you.